I've lived most of my life believing that love, especially a mother's love, was meant to be endless. Not just unconditional, but unbreakable. That belief shaped every decision I made, every part of myself I handed over, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left. My name is Helena, and for more than 30 years, I poured everything I had into raising a child who was never born of my body, but whom I loved as fiercely and wholly as any mother could. His name was Ryan. I first saw him when he was barely a year old, swaddled in a hospital-grade blanket at the city's overcrowded child welfare center. He had been left in a dumpster by his birth parents, a baby with a congenital heart defect, fighting for air in the cold. I didn't understand why I was drawn to him, only that I was. His eyes clung to mine, terrified and searching, and something in me cracked open. I went home that night, sat across the dinner table from my then-husband, and told him I wanted to adopt the boy. At first, he agreed. We were still young, idealistic, clinging to the fantasy of building a life defined by kindness. But fantasy fades under pressure. Ryan's medical needs were more complex than either of us had imagined. Hospital visits became routine, surgeries followed each other like clockwork, and the bills stacked faster than we could keep up. 2 years in, my husband changed. He began using words like burden and mistake. He said, "I want a child of my own," like Ryan was some placeholder, some interim problem. Then came the ultimatum. Either I send Ryan back to the system, or I raise him alone. It was not a choice. I let him walk. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But in the quiet of those first nights without a partner, without sleep, without the certainty of tomorrow, I was consumed by a fear I didn't dare say aloud. What if I can't do this alone? And I almost couldn't. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. I cleaned houses during the day, worked hospital night shifts, and filled the small spaces in between with worry and exhaustion. I ate less so Ryan could eat more. I wore the same winter coat for 6 years so he could have books, tutors, birthday parties he'd forget by morning. I smiled through everything. At least, I thought I was smiling. Looking back, maybe I was just clenching my jaw. The grief came slowly when I stopped dreaming about what my life could have been, when I realized that motherhood had eclipsed every other part of me. There was no Helena anymore, just Mom. Just the provider, the fixer, the quiet servant to a cause no one else could see. I told myself it was worth it, every sacrifice, every broken night. I reminded myself daily, he didn't choose this. I did. That mantra got me through Ryan's school years, through the awkward adolescence when he stopped hugging me and started rolling his eyes. Through the college tuition I scraped together, the down payment on a house he wanted but couldn't afford. I emptied my savings to help him stand taller in front of Vanessa's judgmental family, people who looked at me like I'd crawled out from under a sink. But I didn't care. I kept my head down. I kept giving. And for what? Even then, a small, traitorous voice had begun to whisper, "He doesn't see you. He only sees what you give." I buried that thought beneath more giving. I told myself it wasn't true. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered the day I came home, exhausted, emotionally stripped from losing Lillian, the only person who had ever treated me like an equal. And Ryan didn't even ask how I was. He only asked why I quit my job, why the money would stop. That's when it all started to unravel. But that's not where it began. No, it began here, with me, with the woman who mistook self-destruction for devotion, with the mother who taught her son that love always means saying yes, giving more, staying silent. Now I sit in this quiet room, years removed from those long nights at the kitchen table, and I no longer believe in unbreakable love. I believe in exhausted women, in burnt-out caretakers, in mothers like me who loved so much that they forgot themselves. And when I look in the mirror now, I don't see a hero. I don't see a martyr. I see someone I can barely recognize. A woman whose silence raised a man who would grow up to use that silence against her. That's the part that hurts most. The loneliness, the helplessness of realizing that all I gave became the very thing that destroyed me. I was the one who taught him I didn't matter. But that's going to change. When I walked through Ryan's front door that day, I still carried the ache of grief like a bruise under my skin. Lillian had only just passed, her absence still echoing in my bones. She had been more than an employer. She was the only person in my life who had treated me like a human being without expecting anything in return. Her death had left me hollow, but there was a small, fragile part of me that hoped returning home, coming back to Ryan and Vanessa, might offer something close to warmth. I imagined they'd ask how I was coping. I imagined they might say, "Take some time. We've got you." Instead, I didn't even get through the first sentence. "I won't be working for Lillian anymore," I said, still standing in the entryway, suitcase wheels clicking softly behind me. Ryan barely looked up from his phone. His face didn't fall in concern or confusion. It hardened like granite. "What do you mean you're not working?" he snapped. "That job was $8,000 a month. What the hell are you planning to do now? Just sit around and let us take care of you?" I blinked, stunned. I hadn't even gotten to say why I left. Hadn't had the chance to tell him that Lillian had died, that her final wish was for me to rest, to live for myself. But all he could see was the lost paycheck. My lips parted to speak, but no sound came out. The shock paralyzed me. Then came the disgust, an overwhelming nausea as his words sank in, thick and sharp like shards of glass. That wasn't fear in his voice. That was resentment. Resentment that I had stopped working. Resentment that I might finally need something from him. The son I raised, the boy I loved more than my own breath, was looking at me like I was a burden he'd never asked for. I tried to recover. I thought, maybe I could come back early, help out when the baby comes. Vanessa's planning to get pregnant soon, isn't she? I smiled, thin and trembling. I could be here for that. Help her through it. Vanessa looked up from her laptop with a cool, unreadable expression. "Postpartum recovery requires trained professionals," she said flatly. "You worked as a housekeeper. What would you know about that?" Then came her mother, Carolyn, sweeping in with that same clinical disdain. "Taking care of a newborn isn't just rocking in diapers. It's a science. You need qualifications. This isn't something amateurs can handle." They passed the insult between them like a rehearsed monologue. It wasn't just rejection. It was dismissal. They saw me not as family, not even as a person, just a thing to be pushed aside. Still, I tried to keep the peace. "If everything's already arranged," I murmured, "I won't get in the way." Carolyn nodded, her tone sharpening. "Good. Then you'll take care of the nanny's salary, and the baby nurse. I'll handle the hiring." That final line, cold, entitled, stripped something from me. My stomach twisted, my throat clenched, and I felt something inside me collapse. But Ryan chimed in, as if we were discussing the weather. "She's right, Mom. You shouldn't have quit. Our expenses are going to double. You need to keep working." That was the moment I realized they hadn't welcomed me home. They had summoned their labor force. My jaw tightened. "I'm 58, I said. "I think I've earned the right to rest." Vanessa laughed, sharp and ugly. Rest. You don't even have a pension. What retirement are you talking about? I wanted to scream. I had tried to save, years ago. But Ryan had needed help with his mortgage. Vanessa had needed new furniture. There was always some emergency that required me to postpone my future. That's because you told me to use my savings to help you, I said, voice shaking. To invest in your future. Vanessa crossed her arms. Your income was pathetic. You should have planned better. You bought a house you couldn't even keep in your name. And then Ryan, the child I'd once spoon-fed medicine through sobs, looked at me and said, "You're still healthy. You can work another 20 years. Save retirement talk for when you're 80. I couldn't breathe. Fear clawed at my chest, not fear of violence, but of extinction. I didn't matter to them. I wasn't family. I was a funding stream, a walking checkbook. Every sacrifice I made had taught them to see me as disposable, and that was my fault." Carolyn cleared her throat. "I know a family that needs a live-in assistant. Good pay, room and board. You've done that kind of work before. Should be an easy transition." Vanessa grinned. "Perfect. That way you can keep contributing to our household. Win-win." Carolyn added, as if offering a gift. "Or we can help you apply for kitchen work at a senior residence. They offer lodging too. At least you'd be pulling your own weight." I looked around that room, the room I had once imagined holding my grandchildren in, and I felt it break. Whatever illusion of belonging I had clung to was gone. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a liability. Lonely, forgotten, unwanted. And it was in that moment, amidst their cold, eager planning, that something inside me finally snapped. I saw the truth, and it shattered me. I don't remember sitting down. One moment, I was standing in the foyer, my fingers still curled around the handle of my suitcase, and the next, I was sinking into the couch, like the weight of the world had finally decided to crush me. The house was too quiet, too clean, polished hardwood, filtered air, carefully arranged furniture that had no memory of my touch. I had paid for this place, every cent. Scrubbed floors and folded linens and late-night shifts at the hospital all led to this roof over their heads. But somehow, I was the stranger here, the trespasser. Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone when she said, "We've been thinking about it, and there's no room for you to stay here long-term." Just like that. Casual, offhanded. The living room I had once imagined decorating for their first baby now felt like someone else's waiting room. "You don't contribute to the mortgage," she added, her voice clipped, "so it wouldn't be fair to keep you here indefinitely." The silence afterward rang in my ears louder than her words. I turned to Ryan, praying for a flicker of compassion, something, anything, that would make this feel less cruel. But his gaze slid away, and he offered only a nod, like a manager quietly agreeing with a policy change. "It's not personal," he said. "It's just practical." My breath caught. Not personal? I had carried this boy through sickness, fed him on nights I didn't eat, bent my spine under the weight of other people's messes just to pay his tuition, just to make sure he didn't grow up ashamed of where he came from. And now, in the house I had given him, I was being asked, no, expected to leave. Shock washed over me like a cold wave, then settled into a growing disgust. Not at them, at myself, at the lies I'd told for years, that I was loved, that I was needed, that my sacrifice had meaning. I tried to reason with them. My voice shook, but I held my ground. "This house," I said, "exists because of me. The down payment, the furniture, the groceries, the utility bills, I paid for all of it." Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression as tight as ever. "That was your choice. No one forced you." The words sliced through me. My choice, as if I hadn't been begged, guilted, praised for being generous, as if the very thing they used to worship me for had now become ammunition. Ryan didn't defend me. He just shifted in his seat and said, "You always said family takes care of each other. Well, now it's time you do your part again." He said it without irony, without shame, as if the past 30 years hadn't been me doing exactly that. Then Carolyn entered, as if on cue. "I still think the live-in job is a good option," she offered, in that falsely sweet tone that women like her perfected. "And if that doesn't work out, the senior residence has a few service roles available. Kitchen work, laundry shifts, it's honest pay, lodging included." Her words floated around the room like poison. My stomach twisted, my skin prickled. Anxiety pulsed beneath my ribs. This wasn't just about being dismissed. This was about being repositioned, downgraded from mother to maid, from human to utility. I rose from the couch, unsteady, my hands clenched to stop the shaking. "I'm not going back to that life," I whispered. "I've already quit. I'm not scrubbing anyone's floors again." Carolyn's face tightened. "Then where will you go? You can't expect us to support you. Not at your age." That word, age, landed like a slap. I was 58, not elderly, not helpless. But to them, I was already expired. I felt the walls closing in, the air thickening. My chest tightened with fear, the same fear I used to feel as a child waiting for someone to come home, knowing they wouldn't. Ryan stood then, as if trying to take control of the scene. "Mom, you always said you wanted to be independent. So be independent. This is your chance." His voice was so smooth, so reasonable, so detached. And then, as if the final cruelty were scripted, he kicked over my suitcase, my one bag of belongings, sending it skidding across the floor. "You think you sacrificed?" he hissed. "That was your choice. You owe me. For everything." I froze. The room spun. My ears rang with a rush of blood. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I had come back to rest, to grieve Lillian, to give what little love I had left to a family I thought would catch me. Instead, I had been reduced to a burden, a problem, a cost. Loneliness swallowed me whole, not just because they had turned their backs, but because I had allowed myself to believe, after everything, that they never would. I didn't go to a hotel out of pride. I went because I had nowhere else to go. My suitcase, the one Ryan kicked across the floor like I was already halfway out the door, was packed before I ever knew I needed to leave. That fact alone gutted me. They had been waiting for this, planning it. I took a room on the city's edge, one of those dim, carpet-stained motels with paper-thin walls, and a front desk clerk who didn't bother making eye contact. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, the air conditioner rattling behind me like a distant threat, and I finally cried. Not delicate tears, but racking sobs that came from somewhere I hadn't touched in years. Grief, not just for the betrayal, but for the years I had lost trying to prove I was worth keeping. I felt like a fool, a mother whose love had been bartered down to a monthly wage, a woman thrown out of her own story. The next morning, I sat with Lillian's will trembling in my hands. Her signature, so elegant and calm, felt like a lifeline. She had known. Somehow, even without me saying a word, she had known what I had endured. "To Helena," it read, "who gave dignity to others even when it was denied to her. Live freely now. Live fully." And below that, the number, $8 million. My name on every page. Legal. Binding. Irrefutable. I read it again and again, not out of disbelief, but because I couldn't stop feeling terrified. What if Ryan found out? What if Vanessa did? What would they say? Worse, What would they try to take? That fear, that paralyzing anxiety, became a second skin. I locked the papers in the motel safe. I slept with the trust summary under my pillow like a secret I had to guard with my life. I barely ate. Every knock on the door startled me into silence. My hands shook when I opened emails. I felt hunted. The people I had once called family had made it clear. My only value to them was what I could provide. And now that they'd thrown me away, I was no longer invisible. I was dangerous, because I had something they wanted, and they didn't even know it yet. But they would. It was late afternoon when I first walked into the real estate showroom, hands still clammy with sweat, heart pounding in my chest like a warning bell. I shouldn't have gone, wasn't ready, but something in me needed to move, to act, to prove to myself I still existed beyond the role they'd shoved me into. The lobby was cold and gleaming, filled with polished surfaces and polite judgment. A receptionist gave me a once-over and barely concealed her disdain. I wore the same clothes I had left their house in, creased slacks, a faded cardigan. She offered me a forced smile and asked if I had an appointment. I didn't. She made a call anyway, her voice stiff. "Someone will be with you shortly." That someone was Monica, young, nervous, kind. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She smiled like I mattered. I wanted to thank her, to weep, to tell her she had already done more for me in 10 seconds than my own son had done in years. But I stayed quiet. I told her I was interested in a modest villa. "Something peaceful," I said. "Nothing too grand." She nodded and led me past a row of model homes. And just as she started describing the square footage, a voice pierced the air. "Oh God, who let the help in?" I turned. And there she was, Chloe, Carolyn's niece, all plastic polish and weaponized superiority. We'd met briefly years ago at a holiday gathering. She hadn't remembered my name then. She didn't bother pretending now. "Margaret, right?" she sneered. "Looking to clean a few of these villas?" Her laughter echoed. People turned to look. My throat closed. I felt naked, disgusted, like I'd stepped into a spotlight without armor. "I'm here to buy," I said, softly but clearly. Chloe scoffed. "Oh, please, don't waste people's time." Then, louder. "Security, we have a guest who's clearly in the wrong place." I stood frozen. All my strength, all my composure threatened to crack. But I reached into my bag, pulled out the trust folder, opened my phone, pulled up the banking app. I didn't speak. I just held it out. Monica's eyes widened. Her breath caught. She leaned in and whispered, "Ma'am, that's over 8 million. Shock rippled through the room. And yet, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just emptiness. Because I hadn't come to prove anything. I had come to find something I couldn't name. Belonging? Safety? A place in a world that had erased me? All I knew was this. I was no longer going to be small. No longer going to explain my worth to people who had decided I had none. I was done asking for permission to exist. In the days after I signed for the villa, I thought the worst had passed. I had taken back something, however small. A space of my own. A home with locks that only I controlled. Doors that opened only for me. I told myself I was safe. But safety, I would soon learn, was just another illusion. It began quietly, just an odd look from the concierge, a delivery driver avoiding my eyes, an unfamiliar car idling too long outside the gate. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was still carrying the tremors of what Ryan had done. But when Monica called, her voice hesitant and low, I knew it wasn't paranoia. "Helena," she said gently, "I think you should see this." She sent me a link. It was a live stream. Ryan's face filled the screen, sorrowful, fragile, perfectly lit, and the title burned into my vision like acid. My mother abandoned me when I needed her most. I clicked, not wanting to believe. And there he was, crying, crocodile tears slipping down his cheeks, his voice shaking as he told tens of thousands of strangers how I had walked away after everything he'd done for me. He said he'd supported me for years, that I lived in his home rent-free, that I quit my job without warning and left him and Vanessa to shoulder everything. He said he was never good enough for me, that no matter what he did, I never loved him the way a real mother should. She just wanted to be taken care of like a queen. He sniffled. But we couldn't afford that. We're struggling. The chat was flooded with sympathy. Poor son. How could a mother be so cold? You're better off without her. And there I sat, frozen, watching the world rewrite my life through the mouth of the boy I had once held against my chest, while he cried through fevers and surgeries. The shock hit me first. Numbing, silencing. But then came the disgust. It was almost physical, like something rancid crawling up my throat. How could he? How could he lie so freely, so deliberately, and smile through it all? I had sacrificed my youth, my body, my entire future so he could survive, and now he had the gall to erase all of it in front of an audience for digital applause? I felt sick, and worse, helpless. Because what could I do? The damage was already done. The story was already out there. And in the age of clicks and comments, truth doesn't matter, only performance. The following morning, my name began to appear online. Someone had leaked my photo, my address, even old employment records. I became a target overnight. Hate messages flooded my inbox. Strangers called me a narcissist, a leech, a failed mother. They reposted images of my house, warning others to beware of heartless women. I couldn't leave without eyes following me. I couldn't sleep without checking the locks twice, 3 times. I unplugged my landline after the third threatening call. And through it all, I sat alone in my beautiful new home, paralyzed with fear and anxiety, too ashamed to tell anyone what was happening. I would wake in the middle of the night with the image of Ryan's stream playing in my head. His voice, calculated and pitiful, warping everything I had done. I'd lie in bed clutching the adoption papers, Lillian's will, hospital receipts, all the proof in the world, and wonder what it was worth if no one cared to look. It felt like being erased, worse than being hated. I hadn't just lost a son. I had lost the right to tell my story, and no matter how many facts I held, loneliness spread like rot inside me. I didn't eat. I didn't leave the house. I sat in silence while the world tore me apart and Ryan sold merchandise with slogans like, "Some mothers don't deserve forgiveness." He turned my life into profit, into entertainment, and people loved it. Because villains are good for business, because nuance is boring, because the internet needs someone to burn, and I burned. Then came the tipping point. A woman recognized me at a bookstore. She looked me up and down, lips curled with disdain. "You're the one from the video, right?" she sneered. God, how do you live with yourself? I didn't respond. I just turned, walked out into the rain, and sat on a cold bench near the bus stop. I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours, maybe. Long enough for my clothes to soak through, for my skin to chill. Long enough to understand something I had been resisting. He doesn't love you? He never did. And you're not safe. Not in silence. Not anymore. That night, I turned on my own camera. Not to fight. Not for vengeance. But because I couldn't keep being a ghost in my own life. I had a story too. And this time, I would not let it be buried. I never thought I'd be the type of woman to speak to a camera, to share my life with strangers who might laugh, judge, or turn away. But there I was, alone, under a dim lamp in my kitchen, the room so quiet I could hear the fridge hum, clicking "Go Live" on a platform I barely understood. I had no script, no makeup, no polished image to offer. Just trembling hands, a hollowed chest, and a truth too long buried beneath guilt and silence. Ryan had pushed me into the shadows for the world to trample on, and for weeks I let it happen. I watched him weaponize his tears, twist his voice into a fragile whimper, while he sold a version of me so cruel it didn't even resemble a human being. I had felt helpless, paralyzed. But now, a darker realization had settled into my bones. If I didn't speak, I would disappear completely. I stared into the lens and said, quietly but clearly, "Yes, I am the mother he's talking about." Then I began. I told them how I found Ryan, barely a year old, tossed in a dumpster, left to die with a failing heart and no name. I told them about the endless hospital visits, the nights I held his tiny hand through surgery after surgery, the double shifts I worked just to pay for medication. I told them about my husband's ultimatum, how I chose Ryan over my marriage, how I gave up every dream I'd ever had so he could live. I laid out the adoption certificate, the school invoices, the deed to the house I had bought with my savings, but had signed over to him in full trust. With every word, I peeled back another layer of my grief, exposing a story built not on resentment, but unreturned love. The comments were a flood. Some kind, some cruel, some confused. If this is true, then he's the monster. How could a son do that? She's faking now, trying to clean up her image. Disgust surged as I read them, at the world, at myself, at how I had become a spectacle, a digital war zone where my worth was up for public debate. But then I played the audio recording. The call Ryan had made to another family, offering me up as a live-in housekeeper for their elderly father. "She's obedient, low maintenance," he'd said, as if I were a piece of furniture. "She'll do whatever you need, just tell her it's temporary." His voice, smug and calm, echoed through the stream. A silence followed. Then the tide began to shift. People asked for proof. I uploaded a copy of the trust Lillian had left me, $8 million, signed, witnessed, and notarized. I played clips of Ryan dismissing me, mocking my income, telling me I should keep working until I was 80. But even as public sympathy began to lean in my favor, the fear didn't leave. Because I knew Ryan. I knew his pride, his rage, the lengths he'd go to reclaim control. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, and I was right. 2 days later, new rumors spread. Claims that I had seduced Lillian, that I had manipulated her in her final years, that I was nothing more than a companion for hire, who had exploited a lonely old woman for her wealth. The words stung like open wounds: parasite, opportunist, gold digger in disguise. I felt the walls closing in again, my past turned inside out, twisted into something shameful. And the worst part? It worked. Sponsors pulled support, comments soured, neighbors avoided me in the grocery store. One afternoon, a woman spit at my feet and muttered, "Women like you make me sick." Helplessness clung to me like smoke. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, food left at the door. My hands trembled when I picked up the phone, my chest tight from the mounting pressure. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The loneliness was no longer quiet. It screamed in every empty room. I started to question myself, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had gone too far. If maybe I deserved this exile. That's what decades of gaslighting does to you. You don't just doubt others. You start to doubt your own pain. But then I remembered something. The night before Lillian died, she looked at me and said, "You've spent a lifetime giving. The only thing you owe now is the truth." And so I did something unthinkable. I contacted a lawyer. We filed a defamation suit against Ryan. We provided evidence, timelines, audio files, digital archives. The court moved swiftly. His accounts were suspended. He was ordered to stop all public communication about me. And just like that, the noise quieted. But it wasn't victory. It wasn't even closure. It was just a pause. The war wasn't won. My heart still beat in panic. My skin still flinched at shadows. The rage still simmered, and the grief still poured into my tea at dawn. I had defended myself. Yes, but at what cost? Ryan was no longer my son. I had said it, meant it, but saying it didn't make the ache vanish. I had lost him, first to bitterness, then to lies. And now I had nothing left to lose. The silence that followed the court's ruling was not peace. It was the stillness after an explosion, the kind where dust hangs in the air, choking and heavy, and your ears ring from the shockwave. The judge's voice had been clear, final. Ryan was to cease all communications, retract his claims, and pay damages for defamation and emotional distress. His live stream accounts were shut down. His videos were removed. On paper, I had won. But in reality, it felt like something inside me had died. Not suddenly, but slowly, quietly, after being strangled for years. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with the judgment letter folded in my lap, my hands limp, and I couldn't feel anything. No joy, no triumph, just a kind of bone-deep grief that made breathing feel like betrayal. I went home to an empty house that no longer felt like mine. The floors gleamed, the curtains billowed gently in the breeze. The scent of jasmine from the garden slipped through the open window. But it all felt wrong, like I'd stepped into someone else's life and left mine behind on a battlefield. I stared at the phone for hours that night, expecting it to ring, expecting Ryan to call, to scream, to cry, to beg. But nothing came, and in that nothing, I realized he had let go too, but not with regret, with calculation. I was no longer useful. I had served my purpose, and now I was discarded like a worn-out tool. Even after the lawsuit, the fear didn't fade. I kept waiting for him to find another way to get in, a fake account, a new channel, another cruel headline. I checked the locks every night. I left the hallway light on. I jumped at every unfamiliar car on my street. My body couldn't believe the danger was gone, because part of me knew it wasn't. Not really. The internet never forgets, and people like Ryan never stay quiet for long. He had become a master at feeding on sympathy, and if not me, he'd find someone else to bleed. But I wouldn't be there to watch it. I couldn't. Weeks passed. I avoided the news. I stopped answering calls from people who just wanted to check in. I deleted messages from strangers who offered backhanded support, their kindness laced with doubt. The loneliness was unrelenting, not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that follows you everywhere, even into sleep. I wandered my own house like a ghost, haunted not by Ryan, but by the version of myself that had believed he'd come back one day, that he'd finally say, "I see what you gave. I'm sorry." That dream, too, had died, and mourning it was worse than mourning him. Eventually, I reclaimed the house, the one I had bought for him and Vanessa, the one they threw me out of. The court reversed the deed, citing financial fraud and coercion. The day I walked back in, keys trembling in my hand, I didn't feel victorious. I felt disgusted by the memories soaked into the walls, by the laughter that once echoed in these rooms, by the knowledge that every chair, every appliance, every polished surface had been mine once, and yet was used against me. I didn't touch a thing. I just stood in the middle of the living room and wept. Not for the house, not for the past, but for the woman I had once been, so desperate to be loved that she paid for it in blood. I sold the place a week later. Didn't even stay to oversee the handoff. I didn't want it. Not even the bricks. Let someone else build memories inside it. Mine were ashes. I heard from a friend that Vanessa filed for divorce. She didn't make a public statement, just disappeared from Ryan's life like I had. It didn't surprise me. She had married into a story she thought would serve her, only to realize it was a sinking ship. I didn't rejoice. I didn't feel pity either. Just a dull, tired acceptance. They had burned the bridge. All I did was walk away from the smoke. Months passed. Then, one evening, while scrolling aimlessly, I found a clip. A shaky video of a disheveled man in a foreign alley, hair matted, eyes sunken, clothes torn. Ryan. He was gnawing on a piece of bread beside a garbage bin, speaking to no one, then sobbing without warning. It hit me like a jolt of electricity. His fall from grace was complete. He had nowhere left to go. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't even feel anger. Just a cold, aching emptiness. He was the architect of his own ruin. And yet, I still remembered his first steps, his first words, the warmth of his forehead against my shoulder when he was ill. And for that, I cried. But I didn't call. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer shelter. Because I finally understood. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. And I had already lost enough. I live in a quiet town now, near a lake that barely ripples even in the wind. The days are slow. The light is softer. There are no echoes in this house. Only hush. My neighbors are kind, but distant. The kind of people who nod politely but never ask questions. And I prefer it that way. I tell them I moved here to start fresh, that I'm retired, that I enjoy the quiet. I don't tell them that I sometimes wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, certain that someone is at my door. I don't tell them that I flinch when the mail arrives, or that the sound of a phone ringing still sends panic clawing up my spine. The world thinks I won, but what I really did was survive. And survival, I've learned, doesn't mean the pain stops. It just means you learn to carry it better. I still carry him, Ryan, not in photographs, not in keepsakes, but in memories I never asked for and can't put down. I see him everywhere. In the slant of the sunlight, in the empty chair across the breakfast table, in the way I instinctively reach for the extra mug I used to set out for him. My body remembers even when my mind begs it to forget. There's no justice in that, no escape. Only grief. Deep and enduring. Not just for the child I lost, but for the version of myself who thought loving him would be enough. That woman, the one who believed she could fill a hole in someone else's heart by emptying her own. She's gone now. And I miss her too. Some mornings I sit on the porch and sip my coffee while the lake stretches out in front of me like a secret too tired to tell itself. The stillness is deceptive. It lulls me into thinking that maybe I've outrun the past. But then something small, an old song, a passing phrase, the smell of ginger tea, pulls me back under. And just like that, I'm in their living room again, suitcase in hand, my son's voice cutting through me like a blade. You owe me for the rest of your life. The shock of it still sears. That someone I gave everything to, my youth, my marriage, my dreams, could look me in the eye and see nothing but debt. That he saw love not as sacrifice, but as currency. And when I stopped paying, he declared war. I wish I could say I've let go, That time has washed away the anger, the helplessness, the aching need to understand why. But healing isn't linear. Some days, I feel strong. Other days, I find myself trembling while folding laundry, a pair of socks sending me into a spiral I can't explain. I used to think loneliness meant having no one around. Now I know better. Loneliness is sitting in a house you bought with your own blood and sweat, knowing no one will ever walk through that door again and call you mom without poison in their voice. It's not silence that hurts. It's the absence of being needed in any way that feels pure. And yet, I'm still here. I paint sometimes. I garden. I've started writing letters to myself, things I wish someone else had said. You did your best. You weren't wrong to hope. You're allowed to rest now. I leave them folded on my nightstand, read them when the weight becomes too much. It helps. A little. I don't follow the news about Ryan anymore. The last I heard, he'd left the country. I don't know where he is. I don't want to. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he ever thinks of me. If he regrets what he did. Then I hate myself for even caring. That's the part I despise most. That despite everything, a small part of me still reaches for the boy who never came back. Disgust, not at him, but at myself, sits heavy in my chest. Because I know better now. And knowing better should have protected me from wanting more. People think closure is an event, a line you cross. But it's not. It's a choice you make every single day. And mine is this. I will not let what he did be the final definition of who I am. I won't pretend I'm whole. I won't lie and say I'm healed. But I will keep waking up. I will keep breathing. I will keep building a life that belongs to me. Quiet, small, and mine. And if someone asks, years from now, do you regret it all? I will say, softly, no. I only regret not saving myself sooner. This story is a powerful reminder that love, while sacred, should never come at the cost of one's dignity. For decades, Helena gave everything. Her health, her dreams, her very identity, in the name of motherhood, believing that unconditional sacrifice would one day be met with gratitude. But what she discovered, painfully, is that enabling others at the expense of oneself only teaches them to take without limit. The lesson isn't about regret, it's about awakening. Sometimes the people we raise, support, or stand by will not become who we hoped they'd be. And when that happens, it is not failure to let go. It is self-preservation. Especially in later years, when life becomes quieter, it's vital to ask, who am I when I'm no longer needed? The answer should never be nothing. Helena's journey teaches us that it's never too late to reclaim our time, to establish boundaries, and to live not in service of others, but in honor of ourselves. For the elderly especially, this story is a call to reflect not on what we've given, but on what we still deserve: peace, respect, and the freedom to finally put ourselves first.